Okay. We're going to bid adieu to the Lophophorotes. The non-molting protostomes, with a pair of phyla, two phyla, which are within the Lophophorates. But they're smaller phyla and one is called the Ectoprocta. You read that? Ectoprocta. One more time. Ectoprocta. There we go. Ectoprocta, which means the anus, the procta, is outside of a ring, in contrast to the endoprocta, which we're not really going to talk about. And the brachiopoda, or the lamp shells. And these two phyla, we used to include a third in there, but I'm not going to talk about that third one right now, are characterized by having a structure called a lophophore. What is a lophophore? It is a U-shaped structure with ciliated tentacles for filter feeding. U-shaped structure. And what does that mean? So it kind of looks like, well, like a horseshoe or the letter U. And it's got all these cilia around it. So why are lophophorates important? It goes back to, well, why is there such a thing as the Lophophorotes? Why was that described as being a group of organisms when the thing that kind of seems to unite them is that they are protostomes, but they don't molt? And not molting seems like that's a plesiomorphic condition. And some plesiomorphies do not make good clades. So my good friend Ken Halanich, who is the person who coined the term Lophophorates, said we need to look for some synapomorphies that explain why these animals have diverged into a clade that we can recognize and give it a name that kind of reflects that. So it turns out that all of the phyla that are in the Lophophorates have one of two synapomorphies going on. One is that they are lophophorates and they have this structure called a lophophore, which they use for feeding. So that's one synapomorphy. The other is has to do with this trocho word root, and that refers to a type of larva called a trochophore. So they either have a lophophore or a trochophore larva. So that's kind of the backstory on the Lophophorates and how they had to have some type of apomorphic condition that explained how they would form a clade. Okay, so for the Ectoprocta, these are sometimes referred to as, they include bryozoans, which are moss animals, and sometimes they can be confused for corals. They can kind of look like corals because they can be colonial and they can share a single kind of chitinous tube. So, and when they emerge, they kind of stick their lophophore out. So that's what I'm depicting here. Okay, so that's just a simple example of a colonial bryozoan, which is in this phylum Ectoprocta. Brachiopods, sometimes referred to as lamp shells, because somebody looked at one that reminded them of one of those like old-timey like banker's lamps. So they actually do have a shell or a pair of valves, which, but they are not bivalves. Superficially, they look like bivalves, but if we were to like take a section through a brachiopod, we would find that, well, first of all, we'd find that it's a lophophore inside there if the animal's still alive. And many of them have a stalk on them, kind of like a plant stem, called a pedicel. And the shells are some very important fossils for helping us to age different sedimentary strata. So a bivalve, a brachiopod has a shell that is bilaterally symmetrical in this axis here. So if we were to take versus a bivalve, which is like you can see, if I were to make a section directly down the middle of this shell, it's completely bilaterally symmetrical. Versus a clam or an oyster, they're always like a little bit like, they're not completely bilaterally symmetrical. They're always a little bit asymmetric in this axis. So if I were to try and cut like this, not symmetrical. But a brachiopod is symmetrical. So the vast majority of brachiopods that have been found are, we just find the shells. We just find fossils of them. So we don't always, can't always crack them open to look inside and find the lophophore because it's not there anymore. But there is that superficial resemblance to the mollusks, the bivalves, but not the same. Okay, so those are two phyla of lophophorates that possess that feeding structure called a lophophore, and that's it.